Jesus Freak here, and I had a thought. You see, there's a few different Spanish translations of the Bible out there. Most of them range from meh to ugh. And I find myself gravitating to either, on one hand, the Reina Valera revisions and updates, and on the other, La Biblia de las Americas. But I'm like, the problem I set out to solve when I did the TTT, an English version that was based on the traditional texts and copyright free, so there was no issues of, can't redistribute this, whatever. I think this is even more of a problem with the Spanish Bibles, where there really isn't a contemporary Spanish translation that's really usable. And I'm like, it'd be nice to have a good Spanish translation. We could maybe, put parallel with the King James. And there's a few places that kind of goes awkward if you're using the Reina Valera 60, because in some places they opted to use the critical text. I mean, it's just a little bit here, a little bit there. It's not that big a deal. And all the missing verses in most of the modern English versions, they're there, they're not questioned, they're just there. So it's not the same kind of problems you got with, like, the NIV and such. And even La Biblia de las Americas, as much as it's a Spanish NASB, does have, I think, all the missing verses. So it even has the Comma Johanneum. And it's not even footnoted. Now, the thing is, with the Reina Valera revisions and such, you have the various versions that aren't quite up to modern standards. Then you have the 60. Then you have the 77. And both the 60 and 77 are copyrighted. The 60 is by the United Bible Societies, and the 77 is by HarperCollins. And then you have the Gomez version, which is done by a Ruckmanite. Even worse is the so-called Ray Jaime version, which is so badly translated by people who don't really seem to understand either English or Spanish, that they go right to the title. His name isn't Jaime, it's Jacobo. King James I was called Jacobo, not Jaime. So it shows how much Spanish they know. And they were mistranslating English idioms, leaving a translation full of good arms mistakes, showing how much English they knew. We're talking a translation that's about the obscureness level of the original 1582 Reims version. So what I'd like to do is try to come up with a modern version. Perhaps by trying to see, how much of these various Reina Valera variants is safe to copy. Or how much work would need to be done to bring the earlier versions, the 1865, the 1909, up to modern Spanish. And, Well, ideally, I'd go further. Ideally, what I'd do is I'd take the either the Stephanus Textus Receptus or maybe the Scrivener because he did the job of, you know, oh, deconstructing the KJV into Greek, and you could say, oh, this is the textual choices they made. So that if there's some questions about what textual choices, we can go in line with the King James and put it side by side, and they ain't gonna weird anyone out who speaks both languages. And I basically try to come up with a modern translation, tries to put all this together. But like I said, I don't want to go so far as to have a translation into Spanish that's obscurantist, that's relies on English rather than the original languages. But something that's in Spanish, that's readable Spanish, and can be used side by side with the King James. Now, I mentioned Spanish. There's other languages that could benefit something like this even more than Spanish. Like, I'm not aware of a single Portuguese Bible that isn't a cross translation. Portuguese could really benefit from something like this too. Of course, I don't really speak Portuguese. I got friends who speak it. I got a friend who speaks the Portuguese variety. I got a friend who speaks the Brazilian variety. But I don't personally speak Portuguese. But having that kind of translation you can put side by side with either King James or New King James. You could put it beside the King James and have copyright free. Anyone can release this kind of thing. That would be really nice and really beneficial. I don't think I'm capable of doing it by myself. I just thought I'd put the idea out. Jesus freak out.